Elegant music filled the hallways with soft notes of violin, while expensive heels echoed in the white marble of the Whitmore mansion on Long Island. But behind the kitchen, where the smells of lobster au gratin mingled with the disinfectant, a woman walked silently, almost invisible. Linda Walker, in her worn blue uniform, carried an old bucket as if holding a secret, her hair tied in a simple bun, her face marked by tiredness and courage. No one looked at her. No one knew his name. But she saw everything. There, among arrangements of orchids and crystal bowls, ran a boy with intense eyes and delicate gestures. He was different, special, and he had the same smile that she carried in her memory, like an open wound. Linda paused for a moment behind the curtain of the hall. His eyes lit up. The boy laughed loudly, and the sound shot through his chest like lightning. She squeezed the cloth between her fingers, trying to hold back her tears. How many women have gone through this and been silent? But that night, something would get out of hand. A word would be spoken. A truth would come to light. And the world of this cleaning lady that no one saw would never be the same again. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. On that night of celebration, among smiling politicians, imported champagnes and empty speeches, time stopped because of a single word. A word spoken by a child that almost no one noticed, until his eyes fixed on that simple woman standing next to a cleaning cart. "Mom!" The sound shot through the hall like thunder in a clear sky. The music stopped, the glasses froze in the air, and the faces turned one by one as if something impossible had happened. But no one there had any idea what that meant. No one imagined what that word carried. A secret buried 7 years ago, sewn together with pain, manipulation, and silence. Linda Walker knew. She felt each letter like a punch in the chest. And now, if you're here, maybe it's because you also believe that every truth deserves to be heard. If this story has already touched something inside, then stay and walks with this woman. Leave a gesture, a comment, a support, as if holding someone's hand in the dark. Because telling this story hurts. But to be silent, it hurt for years. 2 weeks before the party, the sky over Long Island was heavy, with low clouds that seemed to press the city against the ground. Linda got off the city bus at 6 in the morning, the humid air sticking to her skin. He pressed his threadbare coat to his chest and walked to the large house at 881 Cedar Hill Road, the Whitmore family mansion. Wrought iron gates, white columns, luxury cars in the garage. She passed through the garden as if she did not exist. I already knew the smell of that place. Imported coffee, fresh flowers, and citrus disinfectant. He greeted the gardener with a shy smile who never answered, climbed up the back and entered through the service door. She put on her apron, tied her hair, and began to clean the kitchen without anyone seeing her. So it was in all houses. She went in, cleaned, left. No questions, no name, no face. In the Whitmore household, there were unwritten rules. Do not look the mistress in the eye. Do not climb without permission. Do not talk to the boy. Linda obeyed, always. But that morning, something changed. As she collected the floor cloths near the stairs, she heard voices coming from upstairs. It was the voice of her mistress, Evelyn Whitmore, firm, elegant, always scented with jasmine, and a man's voice, grave, nervous. A doctor, perhaps. Linda hesitated, the wet cloth running down her hand. He climbed 2 steps, then 2 more. The words came in fragments through the crack in the bathroom door. "The exams don't match, Evelyn. The blood type," said the man. "You can't go back now. He is already my son. He calls Matteo." The name fell like a hammer in Linda's chest. Matteo. She dropped the cloth, her legs trembling. He stared at the void as if trying to hear better with his eyes. The world around him is gone. That name couldn't be there. Matteo was the name she had chosen at the hospital 7 years earlier. The name he murmured with his eyes closed as he pushed, in the midst of fear, pain, the cold of any stretcher in a public hospital. At that time, Linda lived in hiding. an immigrant who recently arrived from Mexico without documents, with a swollen belly and wounded dreams. She worked cleaning bathrooms at dawn, and when she went into labor, she went alone. They said she had fainted. They said the baby was stillborn. She cried for months. No one has ever given a certificate. There was never a burial, only silence, and the pain that stayed inside. But now, that name, that voice, that woman saying matter-of-factly, "He's already my son." Linda's heart began to beat so hard that it seemed to echo in the hallway. She went down the steps without making a sound, passed through the pantry with her gaze glazed over, and locked herself in the room. He leaned against the cold, tiled wall and slid to the floor. There, alone among buckets and smells of bleach, she hugged her knees and closed her eyes. How many mothers lose their children and never have an answer? How many poor women are silenced with invented diagnoses, with false papers, with the coldness of those who have too much power? If you've ever felt a pain that no one saw, comment. Say, "I believe." Say, "Touched me." Because sometimes all a woman needs is to know that she is not alone. When she returned to work, Linda's face looked like someone who had been through a fire, but no one noticed. For everyone, she was just the cleaning lady. At the end of the day, before leaving, she passed discreetly down the corridor of the bedroom wing and heard a faint noise, the sound of a small train being pulled on the carpet. He peeked through the half-open door. A boy with brown hair and dark eyes made a crooked drawing with crayons. He spoke to himself in a soft tone. He repeated words in Spanish. Spanish? Linda felt the ground shake underfoot. She held the doorknob as if it were the edge of a cliff. His body wanted to enter. His fear wanted to run. But before he took any action, Evelyn's voice sounded behind him. "Any problem, Walker?" Linda turned quickly with fright on her face. Evelyn looked with that smile that was never sincere, her eyes cold as marble. "No, ma'am. I was just going to turn off the light. This room has a babysitter. You don't have to worry." Linda lowered her head. "Yes, ma'am." He left there swallowing a scream that wanted to turn into a storm. On the bus home, sitting next to a lady with bags from the market, Linda stared out the window, as if searching for answers in the night sky. She knew something was wrong, that there were lies in that house, and that the name Mateo was more than a coincidence. But how to prove it? How to face that powerful, elegant woman, surrounded by doctors, lawyers, the press and influence? How could an invisible cleaning lady prove that a piece of her heart was living in a mansion that smelled of expensive flowers and rotten secrets? Linda pressed her coat to her chest and took a deep breath. She had almost nothing, but he had courage. And now, he had a question that was never going to leave his soul. Could it be that boy? Was it really your lost son? The afternoon sun filtered through the treetops in the back garden, casting light shadows over the neatly trimmed lawn. It was the only place in the Whitmore mansion where no shouting, ordering, or hurried footsteps could be heard. There, time seemed to move more slowly, lulled only by the sound of the wheels of a small wooden train, which slid in circles on the ground, guided by small, distracted hands. Linda had gone to the back to collect wet cloths, but stopped when she heard that soft, repetitive, almost hypnotic sound. When he looked up, he saw the boy. Sitting on the floor, concentrating on the simple toy, he whispered to himself as he pushed the train on an invisible track. The hands moved continuously in a pattern that Linda recognized from afar, repetitive, stereotyped movements. Something she had seen other times in special children who crossed her path in night shifts cleaning clinics. But that boy was different. There was something in his eyes. When he saw her, he was not frightened, nor did he ignore it like the others. He simply stood up slowly and walked towards him. Linda froze. She wanted to retreat, but something kept her there, as if the air around her had become too heavy to move her body. The boy stood right in front of her, looked at her from the bottom up with deep eyes, and said, as if revealing a secret of the universe, "You smell like heaven." The sentence hit Linda with the force of a silent thunder. Her chest tightened, and her eyes filled without her being able to control it. She tried to smile, but it was like smiling in the face of an avalanche. Those eyes, so similar, so familiar. The same eyes she saw in the mirror when the father of her child looked at her with hope. The same eyes that she had dreamed of every night after the birth, interrupted by lies and silence. She bent down, wanting to say something, but she couldn't. The boy reached out and gently touched the sleeve of his uniform. "It's blue like the sky. I like heaven." Linda felt a lump in her throat. The only thing he could ask in a thread of voice was, "What's your name, dear?" And he replied without hesitation, "Matteo." The ground seemed to disappear under her feet. He had to lean on the handle of the squeegee he was holding so as not to fall. "Matteo," he repeated, as if invoking an ancient spirit. He just nodded and went back to playing with the train. Linda stood there for a few more minutes in silence, watching the boy who drew circles on the floor as if he were drawing a map of the past. He felt his heart beating in an uncontrolled rhythm, as if his soul was screaming, and his body needed to remain quiet. In the distance, near the kitchen windows, a silhouette watched in silence. Evelyn Whitmore, arms crossed, stared at the scene with an indecipherable expression. She didn't smile. It didn't seem surprising either. He just watched, motionless, as if calculating the next steps of a game that no one else knew he was playing. Linda, noticing her presence, quickly walked away. He picked up the cloths forgotten in the chair and entered the laundry room with quick steps. She locked herself in the bathroom, washed her face with cold water, and stared at her own reflection in the stained mirror. Why did that boy talk to her as if he already knew her? Why that name? Why those eyes? Nothing made sense. Or it made too much sense. She needed answers. I needed to understand what happened in that hospital. I needed to know who that child was. But how to do this when everything around you said, "Stay in your place"? The mirror trembled under his heavy breathing. Her hands were moist, pressed against the sink, and the insistent thought hitting like a hammer inside his head. What if it's him? What if it's my son? Outside, the wooden train kept turning on the garden floor. The boy smiled at the sky. And the woman at the window? He didn't take his eyes off Linda, but what exactly did Evelyn know? And why did she seem to be so afraid of that look of a mother meeting her son again? 2 days after meeting the boy in the backyard, Linda woke up with her face still swollen from crying silently. It wasn't physical pain. It was an ancient void, dug by other hands and sealed with silence. But now something had broken. A name, a look, an innocent gesture that tore an old wound. She put on her shabby coat, tied her hair with the same elastic she had worn for years, and walked to the bus stop with her eyes fixed on the ground. The icy wind cut through his face, but it didn't hurt any more than the doubt that gnawed at him inside. She got off in front of the old St. Mary's Hospital in Brooklyn, the same one where she had been admitted alone, in labor, 7 years ago. The building had changed. The walls were painted, the reception smelled of artificial perfume, and there was a new service wing, shiny and impersonal. Linda entered slowly, as if invading her own past. He walked through the corridors that seemed narrower than he remembered, until he reached a small room with a sign that said, "Archive." He knocked on the door. A woman with grey hair and crooked glasses looked up. It was her, Nurse Judith. The years had passed, but the look was the same, gentle but marked. Judith stared at Linda for a few seconds, and a sigh escaped her lips before any words were even spoken. "You're back," he said, his voice weak. Linda nodded. I need to understand what they did to me that day." Judith hesitated, looked around and closed the door. He asked Linda to sit down, and for a moment the silence weighed like a stone in the air. "You screamed for your son, but no one let you see it. They said he was born with complications. That was transferred. After the papers disappeared, and the doctors, 2 of them resigned in the same week. It was all very strange." Linda felt her throat dry up. "Did he die?" The question came out like a wounded whisper. Judith lowered her eyes. "No, I don't believe that. You had no report, no body, no certificate, and when I asked, they told me to shut up. I was threatened with dismissal, but I was always suspicious." Linda collapsed right there, in silence, her shoulders shaking, her hands covering her face. The pain that had been repressed for years found a crack and gushed out. She stayed like that for long minutes, without saying a word, until, as if holding onto his own pieces, he stood up. He thanked the nurse with a handshake and left the hospital with slow but firm steps. A few blocks away, he found a small dark brick church with an iron cross on top. Entered. The place was empty except for a few candles flickering on the altar. He walked to the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe and knelt down. She took out of her pocket a small red handkerchief, the same one she wore in her hair on the day of delivery. He placed it on his chest and closed his eyes. "If my son is alive, it gives me courage. Show me the way. But if he is already in your arms, it gives me peace." He lit a candle, his hands trembling, and was silent. The heart, still in pieces, beat with a faith that the world tried to silence. There, between wooden benches and the smell of melted wax, a promise was made. She would not turn back, no more. But what Linda didn't know yet is that someone was watching his steps, and that the next truths to be revealed could destroy much more than just a lie. Who else would be involved in that silence, and how far Evelyn Whitmore would be willing to go to keep it all buried? The routine at the Whitmore mansion proceeded as a silent choreographed opera. Fresh flowers in the jars, cutlery lined up with precision, towels changed before they were even dirty. Linda came back every day, as always, carrying the bucket and cloths. But now there was something different in her eyes. Every corner of the house he cleaned was also a space he examined. Light steps, attentive ears, eyes that had only lowered before now observed details. It was in the toilet on the second floor that he found the first clue, an open photo album on Evelyn's dressing table, probably forgotten there after a recent visit from a friend. Linda approached slowly, the cloth still damp in her hand, and leafed through carefully. Evelyn smiled in several images, holding a round belly, but something didn't make sense. In all the photos, the belly was the same size, the same shape. The hands were always in the same position. The clothes identical. It was as if they had taken the same photo several times, just changing the background. Later, when he swept the office, he saw at the bottom of the bookshelf a box of old papers partially open. Among old bills and thank you cards, an envelope caught his eye. It contained receipts for the purchase of scenic props. One of them, named after a costume store in Manhattan, mentioned a silicone accessory for external use, artificial pregnancy, realistic model. Linda felt a chill. The next day, on a break she had invented herself, she went to the St. Agatha orphanage, an aging building in the Bronx, with tall windows and peeling walls. She arrived pretending to be a volunteer interested in helping. The director, a thin woman with a tense smile, was at odds with every question about past adoptions. Many old records have been digitized, others were lost, and confidentiality is an absolute priority. Linda thanked her and was preparing to leave when, as she passed through the side courtyard, she saw a document dumpster. The wind had scattered some leaves, and one of them caught in his shoe. As he bent down to pick it up, the world stopped for a moment. It was a torn piece of an entry card, and written in pen, still visible in the lower corner, was part of a surname she hadn't used since she was a teenager, but which was hers, Walker. She put the paper in her pocket, surreptitiously, and left the orphanage with her heart exploding inside her chest. On the subway back, the noise of the tracks seemed to echo his doubts. The city passed like a blur behind the window, but Linda's mind was stuck in the past, in the voices in the hospital, in Mateo's eyes, in Evelyn's face. Everything connected with a cruel precision. As she got off at the station near her home, she walked slowly. The cold was beginning to cut the end of the afternoon, but she didn't even feel it. Her feet took her, almost without realizing it, to the same church where she had lit the candle days before. Entered. He sat down on the wooden bench and let his body rest. He took a deep breath, rested his hands on his lap, and looked at the altar. She followed in silence, carrying that weight that no one saw. And if you're following this story right now, feeling touched by all this, leave a like and subscribe. It is the most beautiful way to show that this pain has not gone unnoticed. Linda needed to know that she was not alone. No woman should have to go through this without having a hand that stretches out, even if silently, on the other side of the screen. The next morning, when she arrived at the mansion, Evelyn was waiting for her on the balcony with a smile too cold to be courtesy. Linda felt her spine freeze. "Good morning, Walker. Can you go up with me for a moment? I need to talk." Her heart jumped. Evelyn rarely spoke to employees, much less did he call upstairs. Evelyn's steps rose in silence, side by side, firm, Linda's hesitant. They entered the reading room. The door was closed. Evelyn sat down in a blue velvet armchair and crossed her legs with calculated elegance. "I noticed you walk quite curious lately." Linda did not answer. He kept his gaze down. "Look, I admire people dedicated to their work, but there are limits, and you're getting closer to subjects that do not concern him." The phrase was said softly, but the poison dripped between the words. "I'm a generous woman, Walker. I give you jobs, stability, but all this can change if people don't know how to stay in your place." Linda looked up for the first time, and what Evelyn saw there, it was not fear, it was pain, it was true. And when those two women stared at each other, there, in silence, in that luxurious hall, an invisible battle began, because one of them hid a secret, and the other, she was willing to risk everything to reveal it. But what Evelyn didn't know yet is that Linda had discovered more than clues, and he was about to find someone capable of turning the tables completely. Who would this unexpected ally be in the midst of darkness? The afternoon descended warm over Long Island, tinting the sky with amber hues and silence. The Whitmore mansion's main porch was arranged with the usual refinement: white china, a silver teapot, glasses of cucumber water, and a small tray of macarons that looked as if they had been carved by hand. Evelyn sat with the posture of a queen, crossing her legs with the rehearsed grace of someone who was born accustomed to controlling environments. In front of her, an empty chair was waiting. "You can sit down, Walker," he said softly, as he poured the hibiscus tea into the cups. Linda walked to the chair with short steps, her heart heavy inside her chest. He sat with his body shrunken, as if afraid to touch something that does not belong to him. The clean blue uniform contrasted with the French lace tablecloth. "I like to talk to those who work with me, you know. I like to keep everything in harmony," Evelyn continued, stirring the tea with circular motions without looking Linda in the eye. The silence between them was denser than the air around them. The distant sound of the birds seemed to adorn the tension that grew by the second. Evelyn looked up with a smile too calm to be natural. "Do you have children, Mrs. Linda?" Linda felt her soul tremble. He swallowed. "I had," he replied in a broken voice, his eyes fixed on the cup. "Oh, what a pity. I imagine you didn't have it, did you?" Evelyn said, as if commenting on the weather. The pain tore from the inside, but Linda did not give in. He took a deep breath and kept his face steady. "Life doesn't always give choices, ma'am." Evelyn let out a light, almost pious laugh. He took a white envelope next to the teapot and pushed gently towards Linda. "There's $1,000 here. Think of it as a thank you for your excellent service. It is difficult to find professionals so discreet." Linda looked at the envelope, but did not touch it. His hands remained in his lap, clenched into invisible fists. "I can't accept that." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Of course you can. Everyone has a price, and this is just a gesture of generosity." Linda looked up slowly, and in that moment, Evelyn seemed to see something she didn't expect. Courage. "My work is worth my dignity. I clean your house, ma'am, not my conscience." The silence returned, colder than before. Evelyn propped the cup down on the saucer with surgical precision and stood up. He walked over to Linda and stopped behind his chair. He leaned in slowly, the scent of jasmine invading the air, and whispered in her ear in a low, poisonous voice, There are secrets that kill, honey. Sometimes it's best to leave doors locked. Do you have any idea what can happen if you mess with what you shouldn't? Linda didn't move. He did not answer, but his eyes turned to the garden, filled with suppressed tears. Evelyn stepped aside, returned to her seat, and smiled as if nothing had happened. You can go back to work. Oh, and please wash the dining room windows before sunset. They are stained. Linda stood up silently, the envelope still on the table. He passed by the balcony, feeling the world spinning around him. But he did not stumble. He didn't look away. At that moment, she was not just a cleaning lady. She was a mother. And if Evelyn thought that was the end of the conversation, he was about to discover how much he underestimated the strength of a woman who had it all taken away. Because now Linda was no longer just searching for the truth. She was ready to face it. But was Evelyn willing to protect her secret at any cost? How far would a woman like her be able to go, so as not to lose everything? The week passed like a grey veil over Linda's shoulders. Each day was a silent effort not to sink. She kept cleaning the mansion, washing the Whitmore's linen sheets, polishing the silver cutlery with steady hands, but her soul weary. Inside, she no longer knew whether to fight against lies or against time. He began to wonder if the truth would ever be enough, or if anyone someday would believe her. That Friday, the body asked for a break, and the soul refuge. Linda walked to the small church where she used to light candles without placing orders, only deliveries. When he entered, he found Mrs. Dolores sitting in the second pew, her white hair covered with a flowered handkerchief, the Bible open on her lap and her eyes closed. Dolores was one of those women who seemed to have been born to welcome. Widow of a Baptist pastor, known for preparing soups for the homeless in the neighborhood and for always having advice on the tip of her tongue. When he saw Linda, he opened a smile that mixed peace and longing. "Daughter, you walk with a face full of war." Linda sat down next to her, and for a moment none spoke. It was as if silence between them was the only possible language. "I'm losing my strength, Donna Dolores. I'm fighting against something big, people who have everything but compassion." The lady nodded slowly. "I know. And maybe it's time to tell you something." Linda turned around with her heart racing. Dolores lowered her voice. 7 years ago, a man showed up here at the church. He wore white, looked nervous. He asked for a woman who wore a red scarf. I knew who it was. You came here every week with that cloth in your hair, knelt there in the corner and cried. He handed me a letter. He said, "When she comes back, give it away. If she never comes back, throw it away." Linda put her hand to her chest. "Did he describe you?" "Tall, black, sad eyes. Doctor, perhaps." "My God." Dolores opened the Bible slowly and took out a time-yellowed envelope, carefully folded. "I kept all this time, waiting for the right day. I think it's here." Linda picked up the envelope with trembling hands. The handwriting was fast, slanted. No name, just one sentence. "To the woman with the red scarf." She opened it carefully. Inside, 3 handwritten pages. The first words were already burning like fire. "Linda, forgive me for not having had the courage to speak at the time. I was an accomplice. When you were admitted to the hospital in labor, someone had already paid for your child to be separated from you. They said it was for medical reasons. But the truth is that the baby was given to a wealthy family. Clandestine adoption. The records were erased. I saw it all, and I was paid to shut up. The name of the doctor who coordinated everything, Dr. Malcolm Rivers." Linda let out a muffled sound. Something between a sob and a scream stuck in her throat. The letter continued, detailing schedules, blacked-out names, and the pressure the doctors were under to obey orders from above. "Look for him, Dr. Rivers. After the scandal, he disappeared. But maybe he's still alive, and maybe he's the only one who can confirm the truth." Linda read the words as if crossing a bridge made of thorns, but on the other side there was light. For the first time, it was not just a painful memory. It was a clue. It was a voice saying, "You're not crazy. You didn't imagine. She looked at Dolores with tears in her eyes. Why did you wait so long? Because you needed to be ready. And now you are. Linda closed the letter, pressed it to her chest, and for the first time in a long time, smiled in faith. I'll find this doctor. The lady smiled too. Go, but go with courage, because who hides a lie for so long? He spares no effort not to be unmasked. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken, a harbinger of rain or revelation. Linda left the church with lighter steps. The letter kept inside the coat was like a seed of justice beating close to the heart. And if you're here, following this story with a heavy heart, it doesn't come off now, because what this woman is about to find out is going to shake everything up, with the past, with the present, and with the mask of powerful people. But the question that kept popping into Linda's mind was, where was the man who could confirm everything? Where did Dr. Malcolm Rivers hide, and why did he disappear so suddenly? Mateo's room was a sanctuary of silence and delicacy, where carefully arranged wooden toys shared space with colorful books and a moon-shaped lamp. The morning sun shone through the half-open window, resting on the blue carpet like a discreet blessing. Linda had been assigned to clean the room that day, something rare. Evelyn used to keep maids away from the boys' personal things. But that morning, for some reason, the door was unlocked, and Linda entered. She passed the cloth gently without touching the toys, respecting every inch of that small universe. That was when he saw, on the corner table, a paper folded in half, with crayons scattered around it. Curiosity was greater than fear. Opened. In the center of the drawing, a little blue train, just like the one he always played with, and two figures holding hands. One of them wore a blue dress and had her hair tied in a bun. Above, written in large, crooked but recognizable letters, "Beautiful Mommy." The world stopped. The cloth fell from his hands. She brought both hands to her face, her body arched in a mute sob, her chest trembling as if carrying all the screams she had once been forced to swallow. It was more than a drawing. It was a reunion without words. With her eyes still teary, she knelt before the small table and held the paper gently. Mateo had drawn what the heart recognized, even if the mind could not name it. He saw her. He felt it. "Mateo," he called in a low voice, in a Spanish numbed by time. The boy, who was playing in the corner with his little train, turned slowly. "Yes, Mummy," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Linda felt her knees fail. "Tú sabes quién soy yo." He smiled and ran over to her, hugging her waist. "Tú hueles igual que el cielo." At that moment, time lost its contours. How many mothers have heard a mommy that they couldn't answer out loud? How many women have been separated from their children, forced to follow as if pain did not live in every heartbeat? If this touched you, comment here. I understand. I was moved. It's true. What pain. Sometimes a comment is all a story needs to be embraced. Linda held the small body against her with the care of someone who rebuilds a home with her arms, and it was at that moment that the door opened with force. Evelyn. The jump echoed off the ground like ice thunder. She stood still for a second, watching the scene with her eyes half closed. "What's that?" he asked, his voice more cutting than ice cream. Linda stood up slowly, still with the drawing in her hands. "He did it. He drew me." Evelyn crossed the room like a hurricane of expensive perfume and hatred in disguise. He snatched the paper from Linda's hands and, without thinking twice, tore it into 4 pieces. Mateo screamed, a scream that seemed to come not only from the throat but from the soul. "No!" He threw himself on the floor, tapping his little hands on the carpet. "He's sensitive," Evelyn said coldly. "Anything disturbs him. And you is crossing the line." Linda tried to speak, but the pain choked. Evelyn pulled Mateo by the arms tightly. "Let's get out of here. Now!" Mateo was crying loudly. Linda, in tears, stood alone in the room, with the pieces of paper still flying in the air. And it was there, in that room full of toys and pain, that she felt. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was real. He had a name, a face, a smell, and it was being forcibly torn away again. But how far would Evelyn be able to go to erase the bonds that fate insisted on rebuilding? The next morning, the Whitmore house was plunged into suspicious silence. There was no ambient music in the corridors, nor the usual aroma of freshly picked flowers in the hall. Everything seemed contained, controlled, as if waiting for a scene scheduled to happen. Linda, dressed in a clean uniform and a serene face, entered through the back door as she did every day. But before she even reached the laundry, 2 security guards were already waiting for her in the hallway. "Mrs. Evelyn wishes to speak with you. Now." The men did not touch her, but their bodies blocked the passage firmly. Linda, without reacting, just nodded. She walked to the living room, where Evelyn was waiting for her sitting on the grey velvet sofa, with a pearl necklace perfectly aligned around her neck. Beside him, standing and with a tense expression, was Charles Whitmore, the senator. His face carried the fatigue of someone who lives with too many secrets. "Mrs. Linda," Evelyn began, her voice too sweet for the gravity that was announced, "we need to deal with a situation. Dainty." Linda stood motionless, like a tree that senses the storm. "This morning my emerald jewel disappeared," Evelyn said, leaning in slightly. "The same one I wore at the campaign gala dinner, the one with inestimable value, and deep, sentimental value." Charles cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Linda kept her gaze steady. "And what do I have to do with it?" Evelyn smiled, a smile as thin as a blade. "One of the security guards found the case under the cleaning products cabinet, where only you have access." Linda blinked slowly. The air seemed denser. The heart, slower. "That's a lie. I'm not in the habit of accusing anyone lightly, but we are talking about a family item, and unfortunately we have no other reasonable explanation." "So they're accusing me of theft." Charles stepped forward, raising his hands. "Beautiful. I insisted that we not make a scandal. I asked her to just dispense with his services. No police, no press. We are campaigning, you understand, don't you?" Linda felt the floor disappear, but she didn't show it. "Yes, I understand. I understand that this house has never seen me as a person, just as a floor cloth." Evelyn stood up, arranging her necklace. "The security guards will accompany you to the gate. His belongings have already been packed. Wish luck." Linda didn't cry. He didn't scream. He took the small bag with what was left of his presence in that house. 2 uniforms, a toothbrush, and a picture frame without a photo. The 2 men escorted her in silence, as if carrying an invisible body. But when she passed through the main entrance, something made her stop. Matteo, he was there, on the 2nd floor, with both hands flat against the window pane, crying, screaming without sound, hitting the glass as if he wanted to break the world. His eyes met hers, and in that instant Linda felt something between them break, not by will, but by imposition. She raised her head. Her eyes were wet, but firm, the straight back, the wounded body, but the soul standing. He walked along the cobblestone path to the gate, where the sun shone, unaware of the injustice. Outside, the street continued with its cruel normality. Cars passed by, neighbors set up fences. No one imagined what had just happened behind those walls. But inside, the abyss had opened. And now, what power was left for a simple woman, without proof, without voice, without money, but with a truth that screamed in her blood? How far Evelyn would go to keep up appearances? And what would Linda have to do to break the silence imposed by iron and blackmail? The train to Rochester cut through the landscape with the slowness of someone who crosses an open wound. The autumn trees burned copper-hued outside the window, but inside Linda's head was only one name, one fate, and one fragile hope: Dr. Malcolm Rivers. In the small town in the countryside, the wind was colder, and the silence of the streets weighed as a memory. She walked to the psychiatric clinic with cautious steps, her coat closed to her neck, and the letter in her pocket, the same one that said he was the key to the truth. The building was old, with walls stained by time and a smell of disinfectant reminiscent of old hospital corridors. The receptionist looked at her suspiciously, but Linda didn't back down. When she said the doctor's name, she was taken to a reserved room without windows, only a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a yellowish lamp on the ceiling. Minutes later, he entered. Dr. Malcolm Rivers seemed too old for his mid-50s. His hunched shoulders, sunken eyes, and trembling hands betrayed a guilt that had left no room for peace. But when his eyes met hers, something in him shuddered. "It's you," he murmured, sitting down slowly. Linda didn't cry, but every part of his body trembled. "Do you know me?" He nodded with difficulty. "You." He had a red scarf. "That night. I remember of your cry. Why did they do that to me?" Silence settled like a sentence. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. It was an order. Evelyn Whitmore as Evelyn Whitmore, There were things about me, photographs, blackmail. CD. I deleted his documents, wrote a false report about his mental health, and I gave her son. I destroyed your life. Linda stood up suddenly, but her legs didn't obey her. He sat down again, bringing his hands to his mouth, trying to contain the scream that wanted to come out. My son, is he still with her? Yes. She created it as her own. He said that he had suffered a miscarriage and paid for everything to be redone. Why are you telling me that now? Malcolm looked around as if he was still being watched. Because I haven't slept in 7 years. Because I pray every night that someone forgive me. And because I kept it. He took a small flash drive out of his coat pocket. Here is everything. The emails, voice messages, proof of payment. Evelyn used me, but I recorded everything, out of fear, out of shame, and out of cowardice. Linda reached out carefully. When the pen drive touched his skin, it was as if a part of the past had taken shape. Here was the truth that no one could bury anymore. With that, can I prove everything? Yes. But be careful. This woman does not measure consequences. It destroyed lives for much less. Linda looked at him with a mixture of anger and compassion. You also destroyed it. He lowered his head, a broken man inside. She got up, put the flash drive to her chest, and, before leaving, looked into his eyes one last time. May God forgive you. I still can't. On the way back, her heart beat differently. It wasn't just pain. It was fury. It was love. It was justice wanting to be born. And the outside world kept running without knowing that soon the Whitmore name would end up in the headlines, not out of charity, but for a crime. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think and helps me to continue showing what so many try to hide. But one question still burned inside Linda like wildfire. What would Evelyn be able to do? When she discovered that the truth now had a voice and proof in the hands of those she despised most. The bus back to Long Island swayed slowly down the avenues, as if time was finally on Linda's side. Outside, the day dawned pale, but inside it was born a fire that would never go out. The pen drive was kept under his blouse, hanging from a makeshift cord, like a reliquary of truth. She was no longer just a cleaner. Now she carried a mission in herself, to let the world know what they had done with her motherhood, with her dignity, and with the boy who still called her in silence. Without a job, without a salary, and without a fixed roof, Linda returned to the only place where her existence was always welcomed, the small church of immigrants in the humble neighborhood where the rich did not set foot, even by mistake. As he crossed the worn wooden door, he smelled the aroma of incense and lit candles. The sound of an amateur choir rehearsed in the background, out of tune but full of faith. In the back row, he sat quietly and let tears flow for the first time since his encounter with Dr. Rivers. Mrs. Dolores, when she saw her, did not need an explanation. He sat next to him and just held his hand tightly. He confessed, Linda whispered. I have proof. Then justice has begun, replied the lady in a firm voice. Little by little, the news spread among the faithful, not as gossip, but as a chain of compassion, A Bolivian who sold flowers at the station offered to take her to the community legal center. A Dominican seamstress said she could help her with tidier clothes in case she needed to go public. A cleaning guy, who did odd jobs as a computer technician, offered to make safe copies of the pen drive. "You're not alone anymore, Miss Linda," he said, his eyes full, "and this story needs to come out of this altar. It needs to reach the world." She smiled humbly, but with a glow that came from the depths of her soul. For the first time, it wasn't just pain. It was action. And if there's one thing that suffering teaches, it's just that when you've lost everything, you have nothing to fear anymore. Between prayers, Linda began to make a plan. It was not enough to denounce. It was necessary to unmask Evelyn where she shone the most, on the stage of vanity, lies, luxury, and the right moment was near. One of the church members, who delivered to the Whitmore family, commented that Evelyn was hosting a lavish birthday party for Mateo. It would be a cinematic event, with coverage of local newspapers, the presence of politicians, influencers, and all of Long Island's high society. The boy would have a bouncy castle in the garden, fireworks, live music. Evelyn didn't just want to celebrate. She wanted to show power. Linda closed her eyes and took a deep breath. So it's there. It is there that the truth will be born. Gradually, he set up his strategy. He gathered the evidence. He recorded a statement. He asked for help to print images, organize documents, and even record short videos with testimonies from former hospital employees. A friend from church offered to get a hidden microphone if needed. Each one contributed as they could. And there, between simple voices and calloused hands, an invisible force was born that not even Evelyn would be able to stop. In the middle of the preparation, on a night of prayer, Linda knelt down and looked at the image of Our Lady with an open heart. "I don't want revenge. I just want justice. I want him to know who his mother is. I want him to know that he was loved from the first second, and that the truth no longer needs to be hidden. And if you've come this far, listening to this story with a heavy heart, don't let go of it now, because the most important moment is yet to come. There are things that only a mother's silence can keep, and there are truths that, when they come to light, change the course of many lives." That same night, Evelyn was working out the last details with the decoration team. He had reflectors installed, photographers hired, and security reinforced. She knew the Whitmore name needed to be impeccable in the next day's headlines, but what she didn't know, it was that among the guests, among the waiters, and the smiling faces of that party, there would also come the woman she tried to bury in silence. And this time, Linda wouldn't come with her head down. She would bring with her the truth, and a piece of the past that Evelyn could never erase. Night fell heavy on Long Island, as if the sky itself sensed that something about to be revealed would change the course of a powerful family. Inside the Whitmore mansion, preparations for the big party were advancing at a frenetic pace. White and gold fabrics were hung, the garden was transformed into a fairy tale setting, and waiters rehearsed their steps between the impeccably decorated tables. Evelyn observed everything with the calculating eye of someone who knew that every detail was an investment in maintaining the perfect image. But a small, seemingly harmless object had just gone through the main door and was about to dismantle everything. It was by delivering a basket of washed clothes that Mrs. Edna, a former employee and silent ally of Linda, left the gift discreetly on the office sideboard. A children's book, blue cover, playful illustrations, and between the pages, a handwritten letter and a pen drive hidden with adhesive tape. When she went back inside, the woman just muttered to herself, "Now go." Hours later, in the early hours of the morning, Charles Whitmore entered his office in search of silence. The house was finally asleep. Evelyn, exhausted, had taken 2 pills to sleep soundly. He poured himself a shot of whiskey, as he did whenever he needed to think, and as he sat down in the armchair, he saw the book. It was strange. The Princess of the Blue Garden. It was to Mateo's taste, but that copy was unfamiliar to him. As I flipped through the pages, the letter fell to the floor. He picked her up slowly, his fingers already quivering. "Mr. Whitmore, I know you don't see me, but I saw it all. For 7 years, I was a shadow in this house, and I saw what I shouldn't. I heard what no one had the courage to say. This thumb drive is not an accusation. It is a truth that you need to know, for your son, by your conscience. With respect, Linda Walker." Charles stared at the signature for long seconds. Then he took a deep breath and plugged the pen drive into his laptop. The main file opened with the shaky image of a room. On the other side of the screen, Dr. Malcolm Rivers appeared, visibly dejected. The recording lasted less than 10 minutes, but it was enough to make the cup slip from the senator's hand and shatter on the carpet. "She blackmailed me. It was Evelyn. I falsified the medical record. The baby was delivered without registration. She bought her son." Charles recoiled in his chair, as if he had been punched in the chest. He moved on to emails, cold exchanges, calculated dates, values, Evelyn discussing with the doctor details of a traceless adoption, negotiating silence, organizing the erasure of a life. He couldn't breathe. He got up, went to the bathroom and washed his face. Then he faced his own reflection, but could not recognize himself. Everything he built, his public image, his perfect family, his faith in his wife, his campaign, was sustained by a crime. He who always talked about values had adopted a son who was not an orphan. He was the son of a silenced, impoverished and deceived woman. And now, knowing this, what would you do? He returned to the room and found Evelyn fast asleep, her breathing rhythmic as someone who has no doubts or guilt. Charles watched her for long minutes. For the first time in years, he was afraid of her. Matteo slept in the next room. Charles opened the door carefully. The boy was hugging his favorite teddy bear, his hair scattered on the pillow. Innocent, beautiful, pure. Nothing Evelyn planned changed the fact that he was her son at heart. But now Charles knew the truth, and truth requires choice. He sat on the edge of the bed and held Matteo's small hand. A tear came down without warning. "Forgive me, son." And there, in the midst of the darkness, Charles understood that lying was more expensive than the shame of admitting a mistake. And if you feel like you've reached a time when you can't close your eyes anymore, continue with Linda, because the highest walls of injustice often fall when truth finds courage. But what Charles didn't know yet was what Evelyn already suspected, and that she was not willing to lose what she had built, even if she had to erase the truth a second time. What would she do if she found out that the pen drive had been delivered? The sky was clear on Long Island, and the Whitmore mansion's garden looked like it came out of a Millionaire fairy tale. Blue balloons rose to the skies like empty promises. Golden lights decorated the trees, reflecting in the crystal bowls that jingled among the forced smiles of the local elite. Cameras captured every angle of the party, drones flew over the roof with watchful eyes, and social columnists exchanged greetings with deputies, investors, and TV presenters. Everything was image, everything was appearance, but behind the shiny facade, something pulsated with force, the truth. In the midst of the elegant frenzy, Evelyn Whitmore wore a beige couture dress. He received guests with the delicacy of a first lady on campaign, while the boy, Matteo, played in a corner of the garden, surrounded by monitors, soap bubbles, and balloon sculptures. He looked distracted, but his eyes were looking for something, or someone. Charles, from a distance, watched everything in silence. He hadn't touched Evelyn since the previous morning. His eyes now carried a different weight. He was no longer an accomplice. He was a man in conflict, ready to choose between the world he built and the truth that he ignored. It was then that she entered. Linda Walker, wearing the same light blue cleaning uniform she wore 7 years ago, crossed the back of the mansion with firm steps. The shabby shoes struck the stone floor with a dignity that no expensive heel there could imitate. Next to her was Mrs. Dolores, with her white veil over her hair and a folder of documents glued to her chest. No one has noticed their entrance. Yet, the cameras were too busy with the empty speeches at the microphone, but Charles saw it, and his heart raced. He made a discreet sign to one of the security guards, and he opened the side gate. Linda passed. His gaze did not tremble. His body was small in the face of so much opulence, but his presence cut through the air like a blade. Matteo suddenly stopped playing. He looked to the side, then to the other. He felt something, and then he saw her. In the middle of the garden, among the shadows of the tent, Linda was there. His eyes widened. Breathing changed. He began to walk, walking past the guests, pushing the clown who was trying to do tricks. People began to notice. A child walking against the flow. A boy pulled by a feeling that even he did not understand, until he stopped in front of her. "You came." His voice was low but firm. Linda smiled with teary eyes. "I promised." Matteo stretched out his arms, and when she crouched down to hug him, he leaned his face against her neck and whispered, "You smell like heaven." It was then that the world stopped. The cameras, by instinct, turned. The clown dropped the balls he was juggling. Evelyn turned, as if something inside her had been forcibly torn away, and what she saw was her nightmare taking shape. The son she had raised for the past 7 years in the arms of the woman she had tried to erase from the world. Silence fell over the party like a thunderbolt. "What is this woman doing here?" Evelyn shouted, advancing towards the couple. "Get her out of here!" But Charles put himself in front. "She's here at my invitation." "You what?" Evelyn was livid. His face, once made up to perfection, now writhed in hatred and despair. Charles kept his voice calm but firm. "It's time for you to stop lying, Evelyn. Everything. I saw it all. The emails, the recordings, the farce of adoption. That doesn't prove anything. Are you going to ruin everything because of a fox? Because of a mother, Evelyn. A mother who had her son stolen." At that moment the public began to approach. Local newspapers, live cameras, cell phones. The press was thirsty for a scoop, and scandal was now inevitable. Linda remained silent. Hugging Matteo, she knew that the moment of truth had begun. But it wasn't over, because Evelyn still had hidden letters. And there was someone among the guests she would never have imagined meeting, someone who knew too much, someone who could change everything. But who was this person? And why, at that very moment, did he fix his eyes on Linda with a look that mixed guilt and dread? The orchestra's music vibrated in cheerful tones under the central tent, the pianist smiling at the elegant crowd as waiters passed by with silver trays filled with glasses and canapés. A TV presenter made jokes into the microphone, announcing the arrival of an allied senator who would come to congratulate Charles on the campaign. The buzz of the elite was mixed with the flashes of the photographers and the exaggerated laughter of the invited influencers. But in the midst of the golden chaos of that carefully manufactured party, something real, something pure, something impossible to control, began to move. Matteo. The boy had escaped from the monitor's hands while she was distracted by a phone call. He walked through the flowery aisles, peeked through the legs of the guests, tripped over a rug, and stood up without crying. His eyes scanned the garden as if looking for the only beacon in the midst of the storm, and then he saw her. Linda, standing next to the side fence, trying to keep away from the crowd. But even from a distance, their eyes met, and at that moment there was no longer any doubt. Matteo's small body froze, her breathing accelerated. The world seemed to dissolve around it. "Mommy!" The word exploded like thunder over the party. The presenter's microphone cut off. The orchestra stopped. The talks ceased. Time froze. Evelyn turned slowly, as if her body didn't want to keep up with the sound her ears could no longer deny. The cup slipped from his fingers and fell, shattering on the marble floor as a reflection of what was to come. Charles, motionless, closed his eyes. There was no turning back. The truth had screamed loudly from the innocent mouth of one who did not know how to lie. "Mommy!" Matteo repeated, running among the adults, not afraid of getting lost, not caring who tried to stop him. He ran like someone coming home, And when he got to Linda, he threw himself against her legs, hugging her so tightly that she almost fell backwards. Linda bent down, her eyes full, her heart collapsing, and wrapped him in a hug that asked for no permission, no explanation. "I knew it," whispered Matteo. "I knew you were going to come back." Linda did not answer. He just closed his eyes and let the tears fall, but they were tears different from the ones he had shed for 7 years. Now it was tears of a new beginning. The press cameras recorded every second. The guests, in shock, murmured, filmed with their cell phones, whispered names, called editors, and in that garden, decorated to hide sins, a truth without makeup stood up. Evelyn tried to move forward, but Charles held her by the arm firmly. "Enough is enough. There is no way to hide it anymore. You're going to destroy everything," she whispered, panting, her eyes wide. "You destroyed it, Evelyn, from the beginning." The crowd opened up around Linda and Matteo. Mrs. Dolores moved, approached, holding the folder with the documents and evidence. A reporter noticed and tried to ask questions, but Linda only protected the boy with her body, like a lioness who finally finds her lost cub. Matteo looked up at her. "Can you live with me now?" Linda smiled with sadness and hope. "I'm going to fight for it, my love, with everything I have." And there, in front of an elite that thought it controlled everything, in front of cameras that only existed to display the brilliance of the powerful, a woman who had been treated as invisible had her name returned, her motherhood recognized, your dignity burned. But in the corner of the garden, hidden behind the catering tent, a figure watched everything with his face covered by a dark veil and a sharp gaze. A woman who didn't show up at parties, that he had worked for Evelyn for many years, and that he knew a secret which had not yet been revealed, a secret capable of changing the course of the battle that was about to explode in the courtroom. Who was she, and what did he hide? Evelyn crossed the garden like a made-up hurricane, her heels sinking into the freshly cut grass, her expression disfigured with anger. He pushed guests, ignored the flashes, and grabbed Matteo's arm tightly, trying to pull him away from Linda. The boy resisted, crying, his little nails clinging to the cleaning lady's blue uniform, as if her clothes were the very ground where he planted his feet. "You won't take it away from me," Evelyn hissed, her eyes red-hot. "This boy is mine." But before she could pull him back in, a firm hand grabbed her fist. Charles. The senator was pale, his eyes downcast for a second, as if still seeking air for what he was going to say. But when he looked at Evelyn, there was no longer a shadow of doubt. There was only one raw truth, and the weight of 7 years of suffocation. "Enough, Evelyn. The truth will be told. Now. Here." She took a step back, surprised. Charles turned to the guests, journalists and cameras, took a deep breath, and asked for attention. One of the campaign team technicians ran up to him, receiving a silver thumb drive with an unnamed label. Charles pointed to the screen that projected images of the party at the back of the stage. "I was complicit in silence, but I will no longer be. This child that everyone knew as our son was taken from his mother illegally, and the woman responsible for this, he has been by my side for years." A buzz ran through the crowd like a wave. Evelyn froze. Charles gave a signal, and the image on the screen changed. The audio began with Dr. Rivers' voice, hoarse, regretful. I falsified the birth papers. It was Mrs. Whitmore who gave me the order. He threatened me with photos, with scandals. He said that his mother was an illegal immigrant, mentally fragile. It was not true. She was just poor. The sentences fell like punches. The expressions of the guests were transformed, from surprise to indignation. Evelyn tried to smile, to deny with her head, but no one believed her anymore. "This is a montage," he shouted, but his voice no longer cut the air. "This woman," he pointed to Linda, "wants to take what's mine." "He was never yours," Charles replied, staring at her as if he no longer recognized her. "You built all this on another woman's pain." At that moment, 2 men pushed a wheelchair to the center of the scene. Everyone walked away. It was Dr. Rivers himself, pale, frail but lucid. He slowly raised his hand and pointed to Linda. "That woman is the mother. I saw the baby in her arms, and I kept silent. I kept silent out of cowardice. Forgive me," his voice broke. "Forgive me, please." Linda held back her tears with the strength of someone who had carried 7 years of silence. The tears came anyway, as if each one wiped a layer of injustice from her skin. Matteo, next to her, squeezed her hand tightly. Evelyn had no more words, only silence, a silence that echoed louder than any speech. The crowd erupted in boos. Some women were crying. A reporter asked loudly, "Senator, what do you intend to do now?" And Charles replied with teary eyes, turning to Linda, "Ask for forgiveness and give back what is hers." Linda did not answer. His hand was still shaking, but his eyes had peace. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe. And let's make this story reach those who need it. The stage tent was emptied. Evelyn, surrounded by screams and contempt, retreated like a defeated shadow. But between their faces, Linda felt a different look. Someone was watching her carefully. That woman in the dark veil was still there. And when her eyes met Linda's, she did something unexpected. She nodded, as if guarding a final piece. As who knows, that is not over yet. But what was this play? What secrets were still hidden? Linda woke up early as always. But now there was a sweet reason for her first smile of the day. Next to him, on the small bed of faded sheets, Matteo slept with his hair messy and one hand clinging to the sheet as if he were still looking for safety. The room was simple, peeling walls and smelling of fresh soap, but for the first time in many years there was peace there. A kind of silence that doesn't hurt. The silence that comes after the storm, when everything is still standing, even wet with pain. The initial hearing had taken place 2 days after the party. In front of the judge, Charles Whitmore surprised everyone by asking for the floor. His voice was firm, but his eyes were tired. "I voluntarily hand over temporary custody of Matteo to his birth mother, Linda Walker. From what I saw, heard and felt, it's the right thing. Evelyn did not show up. No one could find her. The family's lawyer tried to postpone the process, but the judge was clear. The child needs stability and effective bonding, and today she is the one who represents that." So Linda left the courtroom with an envelope of documents, a signed paper, and a small hand entwined in his. She took Matteo to church, the same place where she had so often knelt alone, asking God for a chance to see her son again, if only for a moment. But when she crossed those doors now, she did not enter as the woman who asked, but as the mother who thanked her. The faithful stood up at the sight of her. Smiles, hugs, teary looks. Mrs. Dolores cried when she saw the boy. "He has your eyes, my daughter, and his soul." Matteo watched everything with timid curiosity, but without hiding. During the Mass, he sat on Linda's lap calmly. When the choir began to sing, he surprised her by singing too, quietly, a song he had never learned. But that seemed to already live in it. The faithful were moved. At home, the routine was new but full of small miracles. Matteo began to eat better, to speak more words, to smile more often. Once, when Linda vacuumed the room, he hugged her from behind and said, "Mommy's not a cleaner. Mommy is my light." That night she would cover him carefully, and he would ask, "Tell the story of heaven again." That's what she called the story she invented, about how an angel got lost from heaven and fell to earth, until he found the star that was his home. In the middle of the narrative, while he was already closing his eyes, Linda stopped and whispered, "There are stories that seem to have ended, but they keep the most beautiful moment at the end. That's why we are, because the best can be right on the last page. And if you've been here so far, following everything with an open heart, stay with us until the end, because maybe, in that ending, you'll find a piece of your own story as well." The house where they lived was small, rented with the help of friends from church, but full of life. Matteo drew on the walls with colored pencils, and signed with two names, Mateo Walker. When Linda saw it, she cried silently. At school, he was well received. The teachers noticed rapid advances in speech, gestures, and concentration. "It's as if something inside him had unlocked," said the psychopedagogue, "as if he knows he's now in the right place." But not everything was peace. On the news, Evelyn had not yet been found. An arrest warrant was issued after Dr. Rivers' full testimony, but no clues led to his whereabouts. Some said she had fled to Europe with false documents, others that she was hiding in some property away from the family. Linda tried not to think about it. "I didn't want fear to return to occupy the space that was now of love. But at night, when the phone rang and no one answered on the other end, the cold would rise up the spine again." Evelyn was a powerful woman, wounded and disappeared. This made silence dangerous. One afternoon, when she returned from the market with 2 heavy bags and a light heart, Linda found a white envelope folded under the door. On it, a note in fine handwriting, "You won, for now." There was no signature, but the smell of expensive perfume. She knew it. And if the party had shown the end of a lie, what else was still hidden behind that woman who had done everything to erase her existence? What else would Evelyn be able to do? "Now that you've lost everything?" The courtroom was cold on that autumn morning, with tall walls and pale light streaming in through the old windows. Linda sat on the witness stand with her hands clasped in her lap and her heart beating in a rhythm that only she could hear. Mateo was in the next room, assisted by social workers, drawing on a colored sheet of paper without knowing what that day represented for his destiny. The judge, a gray-haired man with a tired look, watched her in silence. She told everything: the hidden pregnancy, the hospital, the pain of not being able to hold her own child, the humiliation, the dismissal, the reunion, the evidence, the pen drive, the threat. The truth is told in a choked but firm voice. When he finished, the silence of the room was heavy as stone. The judge closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if carrying the shame of a system that failed. Days later, the decision was read. In view of the evidence, the psychological report, the testimonies, and the analysis of the affective bond, this court grants definitive custody of the child Mateo Walker to Mrs. Linda Walker. She didn't cry there. She just lowered her head and squeezed the rosary between her fingers, as if thankful that she was still alive. Evelyn Whitmore was formally indicted for influence peddling, document fraud, and institutional bribery. Police found bank records in tax havens, a scheme that involved not only Linda's case, but other illegal adoptions with immigrant women in vulnerable situations. The story exploded in the newspapers. The elite was in shock. Evelyn, upon being located in a mansion in South Florida, tried to resist arrest, but she was taken handcuffed under the flashes of the cameras, without makeup, without luxury, without masks. Charles, for his part, did the unthinkable. He publicly renounced his candidacy in a press conference broadcast live. "My silence was conniving. My blindness cost a child the truth. I cannot continue to represent a people who demand justice if I myself was negligent with those who needed it most." He then announced the creation of a bill in defense of immigrant mothers who are victims of medical negligence and institutional manipulation, an attempt at redemption that moved part of public opinion. Linda declined all interviews. Journalists camped out in front of the church, the simple house, the school where Mateo now studied. She just said, "This story is from God, and He doesn't need an audience." He returned to his routine. He washed clothes, prepared rice and beans, swept the balcony to the sound of the old radio. On Wednesdays, he helped clean the church. On Fridays, he cooked for the elderly in the neighborhood. And on Sundays, she walked hand in hand with her son to the square, where he now played with other children without fear. On a clear day, Mateo ran up to her with a flower in his hand. "For you, Mom." Linda smiled. She knelt down and hugged him tightly, breathing in the smell of earth and sun. "Thank you for finding me," he whispered. "I never stopped looking, son. she replied, her eyes tearing up. And maybe that was what love was, to keep looking even when the whole world tries to erase the traces. But that same day, while hanging clothes in the backyard, Linda noticed something strange between the sheets. A white envelope, unnamed, no address. Inside, a paper with 4 words written in red, "This is not over yet," and an icy shiver went up his spine. Because the truth can set you free, but it also awakens monsters they don't know how to lose. The sun rose slowly that morning, spreading its golden light through the thin curtains of the small house in Hempstead. The walls, though worn, seemed to smile. A soft smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of lavender from the sheet that dried in the window. In the silence of the room, the old radio played a slow song in Spanish, one of those that speak of longing and restarting. Linda was still lying down, her eyes half closed, when she felt small footsteps approaching. Mateo entered carefully, holding something with both hands. Her hair was messy, her feet were barefoot, and her blue pajamas were already tight at her ankles. "Mommy," he said, in a clean, clear, free voice, and for the first time without hesitation, without fear, without shadow. Linda turned her face slowly, as if she wanted to engrave that sound forever in her heart. "I made a gift," he added, and held out the roll. It was a simple, childish drawing, but full of life. The two were holding hands, smiling under a blue sky with white clouds and a yellow sun right in the center. On the side, a tree and a small house with a crooked sign, "Our Home." And at the top of the drawing, the words written with colored pencils, "Linda and Mateo, Mum and Son." She held the paper with trembling hands, her eyes watering as if her body couldn't stand so much feeling at once. She pulled the boy closer, and the embrace that was born there was stronger than any sentence, more sacred than any ceremony. Linda's chest split in a gentle sob as she leaned her face against her son's hair. "We don't need luxury, son, only love and truth," he whispered in a choked voice. There, in that simple room, with the light of dawn piercing the curtain and caressing them both, was everything the world had tried to steal. The lost time, the kidnapped childhood, the belly denied. Everything there back, sewn together by the silence and strength of two souls who recognized each other in spite of everything. The radio continued to play the old melody as a delicate background for that scene that needed no words. Linda closed her eyes and took a deep breath. It was as if she could feel his heart beating against hers, small pulses of hope and redemption. "Thank you for waiting for me," she said, almost in a whisper. Mateo smiled and nodded, not understanding everything, but feeling everything, because sometimes children see what adults forget, that true love doesn't need to be taught, only remembered. She hung the drawing on the wall with a piece of tape and stared at it for a few seconds, as if recording a miracle. Time, at last, seemed to have made peace with her. The city was still the same, the neighbors still had their own dramas, and the world was still in a hurry and unfairly. But there, in that small house, there was a miracle of peace. But when she went out into the backyard to collect the clothes on the clothesline, she felt something strange in the air. A biting breeze, as if the day wanted to warn that there was still one last shadow to cross. The mailbox was open, although she remembered closing it the day before. Inside, a note, just 3 words, in firm, cold letters. "The war begins." Linda stood still, because even at the most beautiful dawn, there are shadows that are still trying to survive. The afternoon breeze blew gently over the backyard, where Linda and Mateo ran between the vases of basil and lavender. His laughter filled the air, free as he had never been. She wore a simple cotton dress and a red scarf in her hair, the same one that once marked her pain, now a symbol of the silent victory that flourished there. The neighbor passed by on the sidewalk, waved affectionately. The community knew, the city knew. The world now knew that invisible cleaning lady was a mother with a giant soul. Evelyn was under house arrest awaiting trial. Charles was far from politics, but closer to his son. He visited Matteo on Sundays with humble eyes empty of vanity. Justice was done, yes, but more than that, dignity was restored, and that is what this story screams without raising its voice, that there is no uniform that hides the value of a determined woman. That faith can be small, like a lighted candle in a forgotten church, and yet illuminate the darkness of an entire system. That love, when it is real, finds a way, even when everything conspires against it. And if this story touched you, even a little bit, I want to thank you for staying here, for listening, for feeling, because when we listen with our hearts, we become part of this journey too. Your like is like a silent hug that warms and supports this channel to continue telling stories that deserve to be seen. Signing up is like accepting an invitation to another coffee, one of those with the smell of hot bread and eye to eye. And tell me here in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love to see where these beautiful companies are coming from. And it activates the bell so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. Because there are still many other stories of other cleaners, other mothers, other lives that the world tried to erase, but that deserve to be heard. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.